Welcome to the Pardes channel. Today we explain Prophets Judges chapter 12 in a clear and simple way, step by step. Have you ever thought about how a single mispronounced consonant could literally seal a person's fate? Well, in the ancient world, a very simple password actually became a deadly trap that cost tens of thousands of lives. Today, we're going to walk through exactly how a seemingly petty grievance totally spiraled out of control, escalating into one of the most tragic civil wars in biblical history.
Here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll be moving step by step through context in the conflict, the war at the fords, the Shibboleth test, the succession of judges, key simple ideas, and finally, lessons and recap.
Section 1. Context and the conflict.
So we're picking up the story immediately after Jephthah's really monumental victory over the Ammonites back in the previous chapter. The external threat, it's gone. But the internal strife is honestly just getting started. Let's look closely at verse 1. The men of the prominent tribe of Ephraim mobilize their military forces and cross over to a place called Zaphon, which is a Hebrew word that literally translates to north. And they confront Jephthah with this furious, incredibly entitled grievance. They demand, "Why did you go to fight the Ammonites without calling us to go with you?" Now you have to realize, this isn't just a simple question. It is a violent, prideful threat. Because they missed out on the glory, the prestige, and, of course, the spoils of war, they literally threatened to burn Jephthah's house down right over his head. You see, Ephraim was a dominant tribe, and their ego just could not handle being sidelined.
Now in verses 2 and 3, Jephthah delivers a perfectly logical, entirely factual defense. He doesn't back down, he doesn't apologize. Instead, he states plainly that he and his people were engaged in a fierce existential struggle. He tells them straight up, "I called out to you, but you didn't save me out of their hands." Jephthah is explaining the desperate reality of what actually happened. When he saw that Ephraim had completely abandoned him, he took his own life in his hands, crossed over to fight the Ammonites, and the Lord delivered them to him. His counter-argument is absolutely airtight. He's basically saying, if you ignored my desperate cries for help when I needed you the most, why are you marching up today to fight me? He relies purely on the facts.
Section 2. War at the fords.
Okay, now we hit verse 4, and this is where mere words ignite actual physical violence. The Ephraimites throw a deeply cutting insult at the men of Gilead. They call them renegades from Ephraim and Manasseh. To really understand this in the ancient Hebrew context, you have to know that they are basically calling them outcasts, fugitives, illegitimate runaways who didn't truly belong to the main tribes. They are totally stripping them of their identity and their honor. And this profound disrespect, it's the final straw. Jephthah rallies all the men of Gilead and a brutal battle breaks out. The Gileadites strike down the Ephraimites, which just goes to show how rapidly a bruised ego and a toxic insult can escalate into outright bloodshed.
Let's break down the really ruthless military strategy detailed in verse 5. The Gileadites quickly outmaneuver their enemies, and they capture the fords of the Jordan River. Geographically speaking, a ford is just a shallow section of the river. It's the only natural place where an army can safely wade across without needing boats. So by seizing these specific choke points, the Gileadites effectively trap the Ephraimites on the wrong side of the river, completely cutting off their only escape route back home. When a fleeing Ephraimite survivor approaches the water and begs, "Let me cross over," the Gileadite guards standing block ask a chillingly simple question: "Are you an Ephraimite?" If the desperate man lies and says no, well, the trap snaps shut, leading us directly into step 3.
Section 3. The Shibboleth test.
When a fleeing man denied his identity, the Gileadites administered this brilliant yet absolutely terrifying phonetic test. They forced him to say one specific Hebrew word, Shibboleth. Now, the literal translation of this word means a flowing stream of water or an ear of grain, but the meaning of the word wasn't the point at all. It was all about the pronunciation. Because of strict regional dialects that developed over generations of these tribes living apart, an Ephraimite physically could not pronounce that heavy sh sound. Instead, he would slip up and say Sibboleth with a soft S. This uncontrollable linguistic difference, literally just a slip of the tongue, instantly unmasked his true identity. If he failed that pronunciation test, he was slaughtered right there at the water's edge.
The end of verse 6 delivers a truly devastating, horrifying statistic. I want to pause heavily on this number, 42,000. That is how many Ephraimites were executed at the river fords at that time. Just let that scale sink in for a second. This isn't just some tactical military victory, it is a catastrophic national tragedy. Tens of thousands of Israelite brothers, all descending from the exact same patriarchs, lost in a brutal civil war. And it was all sparked by arrogance, a wounded sense of tribal pride, and an absolute failure to communicate reasonably with one another.
Section 4. The Succession of Judges.
Following the heavy climax of that civil war, the narrative abruptly shifts gears. Verse 7 tells us Jephthah led Israel for 6 short years before he died and was buried in a town in Gilead. Next, verse 8 introduces Ibzan of Bethlehem, who judged for 7 years. Verse 9 gives us some fascinating family details about his reign. The guy had 30 sons, and he actually arranged for 30 daughters-in-law to marry in from outside his clan, while sending his own 30 daughters to marry outside his clan. This was most likely a highly strategic move to build widespread political alliances across the different tribes. After Ibzan dies, verses 11 and 12 introduce Elon the Zebulunite, who judged for 10 years and was buried in Ajalon. And finally, we definitely shouldn't skip the very end of the chapter. Verses 13 through 15 introduce our final judge in the sequence, Abdon the Pyrathonitesite. He judged for 8 years, and he was notable for having 40 sons and 30 grandsons, who rode on 70 donkeys. Now, in the ancient Near East, having that many donkeys for your family was a massive display of wealth, prestige, and stable authority. He then died and was buried in Ephraim. The text presents all this as a highly factual, very rapid record of shifting power.
Section 5. Key Simple Ideas.
Looking strictly at the literal text, what we call the Peshat, 3 really distinct themes emerge from this chapter. First, the incredibly tragic nature of civil war. You see, the conflict here wasn't against a foreign, pagan invader like the Ammonites. This was brother against brother. This kind of internal decay resulted in a staggering 42,000 casualties. Second, we see the poisonous, highly destructive effects of intertribal pride. The Ephraimites' fragile ego, their absolute fury over being left out of the glory of battle, is literally the sole catalyst that started this whole catastrophe. And third, the relentless shifting of leadership. We see a rapid, almost mechanical succession of 4 judges: Jephthah, Ibzan, Elon, and Abdon. It really highlights how quickly human power transitions, alliances form, and life simply moves on in the ancient world.
Section 6. Lessons and Recap.
So, what practical life lessons can we actually extract from this ancient narrative to improve ourselves today? First off, we must recognize the immense danger of letting our own egos and grievances escalate. When we feel slighted or ignored, just like Ephraim did, do we respond with fiery threats, or do we try to respond with patience and understanding? Second, we very plainly see the irreversible cost of petty conflict. A simple argument over recognition turned into an absolute massacre. In our own lives, we really must learn to actively de-escalate conflicts before any lasting damage is done to our families or our communities. Finally, we learn that our words have monumental consequences. Just as the mispronunciation of Shibboleth meant literal life or death, the words we choose, the tone we use, and our willingness to communicate clearly can either build sturdy bridges or destroy our relationships entirely.
To recap our explainer today, we've journeyed completely through Judges chapter 12. We started with a bitter post-war dispute, we watched it descend into a horrific civil war at the river fords, we witnessed a deadly linguistic test that claimed 42,000 lives, and we concluded with the subsequent reigns of 4 distinct judges. It leaves us with a pretty provocative thought. If internal unity is so fragile that a single syllable can tear an entire people apart, how carefully must we guard the unity in our own communities today? Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.